Hi, and welcome to Gadget News and Review. We are home to some of the coolest gadgets, and the best consumer reviews online, buyer's guides and features. If you like our review, please subscribe for more upcoming reviews videos. Huawei P20 Pro Review. If you're looking to buy a Huawei P20 Pro, the first thing you should know is that after Google suspended Huawei's future access to Android Play Store and security updates, there are serious question marks over the future of Huawei and Honor phones. Although Huawei has confirmed the Huawei P20 Pro will receive the Android Q update, along with most other pre-existing Huawei phones, there's no word on the future of Huawei phones in 2020 and beyond. That means we don't know if the Huawei P20 Pro could get Android R or Android S when they come along in the future. While the Huawei P20 Pro isn't Huawei's most powerful smartphone anymore, due to the release of the Huawei P30 Pro powerhouse, it's still a great device, and it's now affordable, well, relatively speaking, thanks to the launch of its powerful successor. When it came out, the P20 Pro was able to go head-to-head with the likes of the Samsung Galaxy S9 Plus and the iPhone XS, though it's worth noting both are more powerful, and it's more affordable than either of those devices too. There are some quirks to the Huawei design and software to get used to, but the remarkable work done on the camera means the P20 Pro is still one of the most versatile camera phones out there, whether you're a happy snapper or an amateur enthusiast photographer. Watch the P20 Pro in action below as we review the phone's design and screen. Want to know just how good the Huawei P20 Pro is, to see if a slightly older yet more affordable smartphone is the right fit for you? Read on to find out our full thoughts. Huawei P20 Pro price and availability. Huawei P20 Pro price, £529, 900 Australian dollars, around $685. Launch price, £799, 1,099 Australian dollars, around $1,050. Release date, April 2018. The Huawei P20 Pro price has jumped since its launch in April 2018, with the handset now available for a reasonable £529, 900 Australian dollars, around $685, SIM-free. That's down considerably from its £799, 1,099 Australian dollars, around $1,050 launch price, and it also means it's comfortably cheaper than the Huawei Mate 20 Pro and Huawei P30 Pro, which have succeeded it. However, for the very latest prices and offers, check out our dedicated Huawei P20 Pro deals page to make sure you get it at its cheapest. Key features: 4OMP rear camera with 3x optical zoom. Kirin 970 CPU with AI smarts. Big 4000 mAh battery. If you're interested in the Huawei P20 Pro, there's a good chance it's because of the camera array. There are 3 cameras on the back, one 4OMP main sensor, a 2OMP black and white one and a 3x zoom 8MP camera. You can shoot at 3x without digital zoom, and even get good results at 5x. The real star here is low light performance, though. Standard night shooting just about matches the best, but a dedicated night mode lets you take low light shots with dynamic range to rival an APS-C DSLR. The Huawei P20 Pro also has a very high-resolution 24MP front camera for detailed selfies and reliable face unlocking. Other parts of the phone are a little more conventional. We get the Kirin 970 CPU used in the Huawei Mate 10, 6GB of RAM and 128GB of storage. Note that the Mate 20 Pro has since appeared boasting the Kirin 980 CPU. Like other recent higher-end Huawei phones, the P20 Pro makes quite an impact with its highly reflective glass finish. And it has a much larger battery than most, 4000 mAh, without any obvious added bulk to the shell. Huawei has clearly tried very hard with this phone. The result is a mobile more interesting than the Samsung Galaxy S9 or S9 Plus, particularly if you're going to make use of all the camera's high-end features. Design: eye-catching glass and metal design. Manageable size for a 6.1-inch phone. No headphone jack. Shiny is the word that sums up the Huawei P20 Pro's design best. Yes, it's big. Yes, it has a notch. But sheer reflective spangliness makes this phone stand out. It's 2 big plates of rounded-off Gorilla Glass with a filling of metal finishing off its sides. This metal is aluminium, but it has a polished rather than anodized finish, and looks more like steel. Unlike the stainless steel iPhone X though, a month into using the P20 Pro, the frame is scratch-free, boding well for the phone's durability. For the most part you'll probably see the black and blue versions of the Huawei P20 Pro sold in the UK, but there's also the more eye-catching gradient version. Purple at the top turns smoothly to a greenish turquoise at the bottom, the sort of finish you see more often on a supercar than a phone. This will be a bit of an audience divider. If you find it a bit much, the other finishes are lower key. All are highly reflective, though. The Huawei P20 Pro is also a little prone to fingerprint smudges and the slightly raised camera housing picks up dust fairly quickly. The Huawei P20 Pro has a larger battery than its peers, but you can't tell from its feel. This phone is actually slimmer and lighter than the Samsung Galaxy S9 Plus at just 7.8mm thick. However, the Samsung does a slightly better job of appearing to be all-screen front-on, because the Huawei's screen does not curve around at the sides. Only the glass does, and just the last millimeter or so at that. The Huawei P20 Pro, along with the standard Huawei P20, was the first but not the last Huawei phone with a notch, the display cutout made famous by the iPhone X. Apple's excuse for the notch is it is required for all the tech used for the phone's face unlock feature, a normal camera, an IR camera, a dot projector, a proximity sensor and more. Huawei doesn't have quite as good an excuse, as there's just a high-res camera and speaker on the Huawei P20 Pro's front. However, the notch is smaller. Notches may end up being a Crocs grade, what were we thinking, move in hindsight, but they seem to be in fashion for now. You'll most likely forget the notches there after a couple of days, particularly as when watching standard 16:9 video there are black bars where the notch sits anyway. Huawei has also followed another recent trend, as the Huawei P20 Pro doesn't have a headphone jack. You get a USB-C to 3.5mm adapter in the box, or you can use wireless headphones. We would, obviously, prefer a real jack. The phone is water-resistant to IP67, meaning it can handle submersion in 1 meter of fresh water for 30 minutes, but don't start dunking it for fun. There's a fingerprint scanner below the Huawei P20 Pro's display and, like those of every recent higher-end Huawei, it's extremely fast. It takes you to the home screen in a heartbeat. Its face unlock is exceptionally fast too. Rather than using clever IR techniques like the iPhone X, the Huawei P20 Pro simply reads the high-resolution feed from its front camera to recognize your face. It works, in our experience, every time. And even holds up well in lower light. This does suggest it is built for speed rather than security, though. You don't even need to press the power button to make face unlock work. While there's no proximity sensor to tell when your face is in front of the screen, the Huawei P20 Pro's gyroscope senses when the phone has been picked up, or taken out of your pocket. It then immediately starts scanning for your face. As Huawei's phones still don't have the innate desirability of a Samsung or Apple, raw outer hardware was never going to be the top selling point of the Huawei P20 Pro. However, Huawei has done well here. The phone feels and looks expensive, and about as slim and light as we could hope for given its screen size. Like most other high-end Huawei phones, the P20 Pro does not have the highest display resolution in its class. This is a 1080 by 2244 AMOLED screen. The numbers sound unusual, but this is really just a full HD screen stretched out to an 18:9 aspect ratio. That's right, it's even wider or longer than most other 18:9 screen phones. Pixel density of 408 pixels per inch isn't even close to the 529 pixels per inch of the Samsung Galaxy S9 Plus. The only time you're likely to notice though is when using a phone-based VR headset, and if that fad isn't dead, it is at least dormant. Okay, if you look close you can see slight evidence of the pentile fizz that affects Samsung OLEDs that don't have insane pixel density. This is caused by Samsung OLEDs pixels sharing sub-pixels, reducing perceived resolution a bit. The Huawei P20 Pro's display quality is excellent though. Blacks are perfect, and there's minimal blue cast when the phone is tilted, which affects some less advanced OLED displays. You also have a choice of color profiles. Standard color looks a little more saturated than old industry standard sRGB, but offers a fairly natural, relaxed look. Vivid color deepens tones a little, with a slight subtlety trade-off. Like other Huawei phones, you can also tune the color temperature to your liking, although the default setting is pleasant. The Huawei P20 Pro also has a few more unusual tweaks. Its display can change the color temperature on the fly to suit ambient light conditions, and the top part of the screen can be blacked out to completely hide the notch. This looks particularly neat as this little area can still be used for notification icons when blacked out. Also worth noting, the P20 Pro ships with a pre-fitted screen protector, giving it the best chance of avoiding scratches possible. That said, this plastic film does attract fingerprints pretty readily, so you may want to swap it for a tempered glass screen protector down the line. The Huawei P20 Pro has a 4000 mAh battery, which is a solid 500 mAh larger than the Samsung Galaxy S9 Plus. Its stamina is excellent as well. You can abuse this phone with hours of audio streaming and good chunks of YouTube streaming and it'll still last a full day. We've found it quite easy to finish the day with 40% charge. Watch our camera review above to find out exactly what makes the P20 Pro a 4.55 device. The Huawei P20 Pro also performs extremely well in our standard video playback test, where we play a 90-minute video at maximum brightness. It only loses 9% in this test, which is exceptional. That's the same result as the Mate 10 Pro managed, which is no great surprise as they have similar basic hardware and the same battery capacity. We did have a suspicion the Huawei P20 Pro has an undefeatable automatic brightness algorithm going on in the background, though. The phone's screen is clear in bright conditions, but didn't look searing indoors even with the backlight set to the maximum. To test further, we re-ran the test with a 100-watt LED bulb shining just over the screen to try and kick the display up a gear. Sure enough, the test took 13% off the Huawei P20 Pro's battery that time. However, battery life is great whatever way you try to skew things. It charges fast too. The supplied fast charger takes 1 hour 24 minutes to get the Huawei P20 Pro from completely flat to 100%. It takes 45 minutes to get from 0% to 80%. There's one missing piece of the jigsaw though, the Huawei P20 Pro doesn't support wireless charging. Many of you won't care, particularly when even the latest standards don't get close to the speeds of the plugged-in charger. However, most rival flagships now offer this feature, including top-end phones from Google and Apple, and it's also something available in the Huawei Mate 20 Pro. The Huawei P20 Pro has 3 cameras arranged across its back, and while it's not quite the 4 of the more recent Huawei P30 Pro, that's still an impressive lineup. Here's where things get really interesting. Our main camera has an ultra-high-resolution 4OMP sensor. It is backed up by a 2OMP black and white sensor that helps with processing, including decreasing image noise and improving dynamic range. The third camera has a 3x zoom lens and an 8MP sensor, letting you zoom into a scene without using digital zoom. It is a fantastic, ultra-flexible setup, and one that raises many questions. Can you really shoot 4OMP photos? How much more detail do they have? And has low light performance been sacrificed for resolution? Thankfully, most of these questions have satisfying answers. As standard, the Huawei P20 Pro shoots 1OMP photos. You can shoot 4OMP ones if you like, and even 76.2 MB DNG RAW files when using the Pro mode. Huawei's JPEG handling is so good that when you zoom to 100% in a 1OMP photo, it actually appears far sharper than a corresponding 4OMP one. However, look deeper, to the point where the 1OMP photo devolves to blocky pixels, and you'll see far more detail in the 4OMP files. At pixel level, these images aren't ultra-sharp, but there's real additional image data here. However, you're actually better off going with the way Huawei intends you to use the P20 Pro's camera, shooting 1OMP shots and using the zoom. Despite having lower resolution, the 3x zoom camera can take some great pics and renders more detail than a crop of the RAW or 4OMP JPEG files can provide. You can also shoot at 5x zoom, which Huawei calls hybrid zoom. This uses far more intense processing than the 3x zoom and doesn't uncover more true detail. But it does make far-away text clearer and uses smart upscaling to make the photos look right rather than blurred like a simple digital zoom. Huawei loves smart camera processing, and this has also resulted in something called ICE. This is Huawei's software version of optical image stabilization (OIS), using smarts to get rid of the need for mechanical stabilization. What this means is the camera never seems to slow its exposure beyond 1/16 of a second, using processing and the black and white secondary sensor to improve image quality. Judging by our hand-wobbling tests, though, the 3x zoom camera does have OIS, because a zoom lens effectively amplifies any shakiness in your hand. The Huawei P20 Pro uses relatively high ISO sensitivity at night, but the resulting images are still comparable with the best, including the iPhone X. Huawei's processing and ISO really seems to work, although the Galaxy S series greater, although decreasing, reliance on OIS can still result in better photos in low light. This all changes when you use the Huawei P20 Pro's night mode, though. It's nestled fairly deep in the camera app, but is one of the phone's most impressive features. It merges a barrage of images over 3 to 6 seconds. Previous Huawei phones had a similar mode, but this one is designed to be used handheld, which is an amazing feat of AI image processing. And it works. Using night mode, you can get ultra-dark shots with dynamic range and detail far in excess of most of this phone's rivals. To really test it, we put it up against an APS-C sensor Fujifilm X-T10 on a tripod. It needed an exposure of around 15 seconds to shoot at ISO 200. The dynamic range results of the Huawei P20 Pro shot and the Fujifilm X-T10s are comparable, which is nuts. Of course, the Fujifilm image has radically more detail, making the Huawei image look extremely soft as soon as you zoom in a little, but it is a remarkable achievement nevertheless. It can handle the kind of scenes that make other phones curl up and cry, and even gives the excellent Pixel night sight a run for its money. The Huawei P20 Pro's camera is an interesting jigsaw puzzle of technology. But are its actual, normal images any good? For the most part they are great. Its 10MP images are sharp and detailed, and low on noise. The phone handles exposure and dynamic range optimization very well, although at times it can be a little too obsessed with retaining every square inch of highlight, making some parts of a photo look a little dull. Thanks to the large main sensor and relatively wide f1.8 Leica lens, natural bokeh background blur is lovely and very pronounced. While there's a great virtual wide aperture mode, you don't need to use it to isolate near subjects. The one part we don't always like is the workings of the AI scene selection. The Huawei P20 Pro constantly analyzes the camera feed to see what you're taking a photo of. It'll recognize food images and nature shots with great speed and accuracy. However, what it does to these pics isn't always welcome. It turbocharges color too often, resulting in near-toxic levels of color saturation in some shots. When this is the photographic equivalent of face smoothing, it'd be nice to have some control over its level. You can switch it off entirely, though, which might be an idea if you end up with fields that look as though they've been laced with neon. The camera app is not as tasteful or well-designed as Samsung's or Apple's either. Its big rounded font seems inspired by the interfaces of Nikon cameras, but they make the app seem less polished and less professional. The Huawei P20 Pro can shoot video up to 4K resolution, but for handheld footage you may want to stick to 1080p. At 4K res there's no image stabilization, which makes footage look juddery and amateurish. At 1080p, though, the software stabilization is extremely effective. You can run along the road with the Huawei P20 Pro in your hands and the footage will still look pretty smooth. You lose the stabilization when the frame rate is up to 60 FPS at 1080p, so you do need to think about whether you need stability or another strand of image quality. There's slow-mo shooting too, up to 960 FPS 32x speed. However, at 960 FPS and 240 FPS you can only shoot at 720p, the same cap as the Galaxy S9's 960 FPS mode. These videos don't look super detailed though, so won't come across well on a large screen. The Huawei P20 Pro's front camera has specs worth bragging about too. It uses a very high-resolution 24MP sensor. This resolution isn't all that obvious in the shots it takes, though. The Pixel 2 still takes clearer selfies with cleaner-looking fine detail. However, like the rear camera, it holds up well in low light, making us wonder if there's some automatic pixel binning going on. This is where sensor pixels are combined to increase low-light performance at the expense of detail. The Huawei P20 Pro runs Android 9 with Huawei's EMUI interface on top, having been upgraded from Android 8, which is what it launched with. If you've used a higher-end Huawei phone in the last year or so, you'll know what to expect. When first turned on with that version of Android, the Huawei P20 Pro doesn't not have an apps menu. It uses an iOS-like arrangement where all your apps end up on the home screens, for you to organize into folders. Some like this, many don't. However, you can bring back the more conventional vertical scrolling apps menu following a trip to the settings menu. This is how we ended up using the Huawei P20 Pro, with the apps menu in place. Find out more about the P20 Pro's UI and multimedia chops in the video above. A slim alphabet nav bar to the far right of the screen lets you quick flick through an epic app collection. And there's a row of frequently, or recently, used apps right at the top of this app screen. The odd Huawei quirk remains. A lock screen that cycles through a library of stock-style images is in place as standard, and the settings menu is different to that of standard Android. This phone also supports themes. A Themes app offers scores of the things made by Huawei fans, and the Huawei P20 Pro has 12 pre-installed ones made by Huawei. The quality and tastefulness of these themes, even Huawei's ones, varies hugely. But it does let you alter the phone's look much more than, say, a Pixel phone. EMUI's performance on the Huawei P20 Pro is excellent. It feels extremely fast and responsive, and app load times are much shorter than those of a mid-range phone. There are quite a few pre-installed apps, though. These aren't the slightly offensive third-party bundle-ins you see in some phones, just basic utilities Huawei thinks will prove useful. There's a weather app, a torch, a translator, a phone manager, a file manager and mirror, which lets you zoom into the selfie camera's view. You could use it to check your makeup or see how terrible your eye bags look on the way to work. The Huawei P20 Pro also has a smart controller app that uses the IR transmitter on the phone's top edge. This mimics the signals sent by old-school home entertainment remotes, letting it function as a universal remote. Unlike a Logitech Harmony remote, you can't program in macros that fire off a chain of commands with a single press, but it is a neat extra that may go unnoticed. The other big names in the business stopped using IR blasters years ago. You might imagine the Huawei P20 Pro's notch would be an annoyance for games, but it isn't. When the phone recognizes a game or app that won't play well with the notch, it automatically blacks out the notch area, removing it from play. It's not as simple as doing this for all third-party apps, though. Spotify keeps the notch in place, but Candy Crush Saga and Asphalt 8 do not. This is pretty clever, although we have seen some reports of it causing interface issues with the odd app. As you'd hope, high-end games run very well on the phone, with no obvious performance dips in the titles we tried. The Huawei P20 Pro may not have the most powerful GPU in the phone world, but it has a lot of pep for one with a display only a little more pixel-packed than 1080p. The Huawei P20 Pro has its own video and music apps. These are basic players that let you watch, or listen to, content on your phone. Unfortunately, the phone doesn't currently support full HD streaming through Netflix, though. It's limited to 540p. While this still looks good, could pass for 720p, and will save your data allowance a further beating, this is likely to disappoint many. The Huawei P20 Pro does have good speakers, though. A driver on the bottom edge of the phone delivers the bulk of the sound, and a front earpiece speaker is used to play additional higher frequency sound to stop it sounding lopsided when held in front of your face. This is a meaty sounding speaker array with good bass for a phone and unusually solid separation of the parts of a mix. It's not at the level of the Razer phone, but does make podcasts and YouTube videos enjoyable. At maximum volume the treble becomes a little brittle and harsh with certain content though, showing how hard Huawei pushes the phone's microdrivers. The Huawei P20 Pro doesn't have a brand new chipset, using the same Kirin 970 CPU as the Huawei Mate 10 Pro, released in late 2017. This chipset has 8 cores. 4 are Cortex-A73s, designed for high-performance tasks, the other 4 are Cortex-A53s, for everyday use. This puts it behind the Snapdragon 845 used in some variants of the Samsung Galaxy S9 Plus, which has semi-custom Cryo cores based on the Cortex-A75 and Cortex-A55 designs. These newer rival cores are more efficient, offering greater power at the same clock speed. The Huawei P20 Pro also has a lesser graphics chipset than the Galaxy S9 Plus. It's a 12-core Mali G72 here, where the Exynos and Snapdragon versions of the Samsung use either an 18-core Mali G72 or the excellent Adreno 630. But does that play out in benchmarks? In Geekbench 4, the Huawei P20 Pro scores 6,775 points, 1,918 per core. This is a lot lower than the roughly 9,000 points of the Galaxy S9, Snapdragon 845 or the 10,000-ish points of the iPhone X. However, we also need to consider screen resolution in this. The Huawei P20 Pro doesn't have as many pixels to render as either of those phones, reducing CPU and GPU strain in many situations. Another interesting point for the real tech nerds is that the P20 Pro does not appear to use dual-channel RAM. Its copy speeds are those of conventional DDR4. Its internal storage is pretty quick though. Read speeds of 501 megabytes per second match some lower mid-range SSDs, and write speeds of 190 megabytes per second aren't bad either. The P20 Pro is something of a coup from Huawei. After banging on about AI for 6 months, this phone's camera proves it's not all marketing talk after all. It results in the best handheld ultra-low-light photos you can get from a phone. Samsung offers a sharper screen, better brand cred and more power. However, we actually appreciate the Huawei P20 Pro's slightly better battery life and improved camera flexibility more most of the time. It's a top-end phone with a price to match, although it's dropped a fair bit now, yet has everything needed in a world-class handset, including a very capable camera, plenty of power, great battery life and an impressive build. This phone is for those who want new and exciting tech but can't quite stomach the price of a top-end iPhone XS or Samsung Galaxy S9 Plus. It's not cheap, far from it, but is still more affordable than those phones, and as the phone gets older, its price keeps dropping. The Huawei P20 Pro is also more interesting than Samsung's latest, which is a big win for Huawei.